there's just so many factors that are not in your control when you're writing for orchestra. So with my new piece that I just showed you, I wanted to at least control that factor.
I think there is no experience on earth quite like hearing your orchestra piece played for the first time by an orchestra. There's just nothing like it. It's the most thrilling and terrifying experience you can possibly have.
Even if you've had a certain level of success, it doesn't make you infallible.
Learn anything from a piece that affects the next one, then you're not a very good composer. Every composer should be learning from their experiences, positive and negative. Give you a little introduction, everyone. This is the composer, a good friend of mine, Saad Haddad. He is a composer who I met because he wrote a paper on my music when I was a young composer, and he was an even younger composer at USC. And he subsequently studied at USC, he studied at Juilliard, he studied at Columbia. He's written for many ensembles, including recently the LA Philharmonic. He has taught at Columbia and now runs his own, how would you describe it? Company slash teaching emporium of from people from around the world learning how to compose. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's kind of like a little mini academy for composers, for concert composers.
He also has a really amazing YouTube channel that is very active and has tons of interviews of different composers. And it's really funny. So I had a young composer write me the other day being like, how do I make parts? And I'm like, oh, there's probably a sod video on how to print parts, and of course there is. And so if I'll email you his channel after class. But like in addition to his own wonderful music, which I've asked him to come talk about today, well, I thought this could be maybe you could share some of your work. So this is for almost everyone here. This is a notation class. And for everyone here, this is a notation class. This is the second semester of music notation. Most of the people here have taken the first semester already. Half composers, half not composers. Everyone to a degree composes, but so they've all been, most of them have been through the ringer when it comes to more basic things. And one of the topics I really wanted to tackle this semester was microtonal music. And so that's one of the reasons I asked you on here, is to kind of talk about your own work, which has, through your own kind of own heritage as a Lebanese American composer, and exploring kind of your background, but also just your general, but also your interest in things like spectral music, have led you to write a lot of music with a lot of microtones over the years. So you are not required to share microtonal music with us, but I think we'd love to hear anything we've got from you. But if you happen to want to talk about some of your music with microtones, I think that would be great. And otherwise, yeah, I guess I'll sort of leave it to you, and I'll bug you and ask you questions as you go along, and then we'll open up the floor to everyone to just ask questions in general.
Okay, cool. Well, first of all, really nice to be with you. Well, I know we're on Zoom, but this is kind of this is kind of my bread and butter doing things like this, so I'm used to it myself. But it's nice to be here. I mainly these days write orchestral and chamber music and some solo music as well. And like Chris was saying, I do a lot of stuff with microtones. And the thing I should say first about microtones in general is that there's a lot of music out there that is about microtones, right? Like the whole point of it is, look, let's hear this microtone. Let's hear how let me see if I can open up my piano tech software. Okay, so like there's a lot of music out there, which is great, but it's all about like so like that's C and C sharp, right? So we all know what that sounds like, but there's a lot of music out there that it pretty much concerns itself with this interval. And it's all about if you hear this interval like played by violins or clarinets or anything acoustic, I'm being very general here, but what you get is this like really amazing beating sound where like your ears start to like ring a lot, from just this interval. And the music, it ends up kind of just being about that, right? So my whole thing with microtones is that the music is not actually about the microtones at all. It's
That's
about
kind of
listening.
why I like it, though.
Yeah. So it's all about listening to form. It's all about listening to melody, harmony. It's all about like listening for the concept and I usually like make it well known. This is what the piece is about, whether it's narrative or it's about something, so that you're focused on that when you're listening to. And people like afterwards, like they don't even, if I'm doing my job correctly, microtones are the last thing on their mind, actually. So I don't really care that they hear them, but I use them because it helps me reach the effect I want. So I want to just start with that, I guess, before I do anything, before I show you anything. Um, let's see. Is there anything you want to hear, Chris? Or I also have like a thing I just literally finished a few days ago that might be fun to share. Um,
I think, I think there's a bunch of pieces of yours that are really lovely. We could hear your recent orchestra piece. We could hear your string quartet. We could hear your harp piece. I don't know. I mean, it's really, I think I would vote for like pieces that have been played live already, but also if you want to share the new thing, only because I would love to know what your experience is of working with different groups and facing different, and also, I mean, in addition to not be like Mr. Microtones, your music has a lot of challenges in it of different sorts, and therefore, I would love it if you, could just talk about that as well.
well, yeah, I mean, what I feel like showing orchestral music is sometimes not the most helpful thing just because you see so many stabs and it can kind of get overwhelming. Actually, this piece that I wrote recently for trumpet would be a great piece to show. It's very, but I don't think I have the recording. How about I show this piece for flute, solo flute? Have you heard
Yeah, I
this
know this
piece
one.
before? Are you
The
aware of this piece?
Ala Jan Marash. Yes, I know this
Okay,
one.
okay, okay. Why don't we do this one? This would be a great introduction, I think. Okay, so like I was saying before, like my music is all about following like a concept first before worrying about microtones or anything like that. So you can already see it in this piece. It's a piece for solo flute, and my idea was I wanted to grab little fragments from composers I really admire. So there's Berio from the flute sequenza. If you look at the Berio flute sequenza, it starts exactly like this.
Not to go immediately off on a tangent, but isn't
Yeah.
it true that that piece was actually a piece that he wrote out completely in proportional notation and then got
Yeah.
sick of how badly people played it and then renotated the entire piece in
Yeah.
written out?
Yeah, so like this, yeah, exactly. So that piece, it's written out in such a way that doesn't really have rhythms and things like that, and like the first version. But actually, the notation you see me use there is my notation.
There you go.
I
See,
created my own rhythm. Yeah.
that's why I was curious because I noticed it was not the original. The original, actually,
No.
maybe that's too much of a tangent, but we'll look at it some other time. We just come off like 2 weeks of flute notation too, so
Oh,
this is
really? Okay.
yeah.
Perfect.
We just spent 2 weeks talking about flute notation, so we're really well prepared for your flute notation at this point.
See, it's totally planned.
Like, totally, nothing random about it.
No. But yeah, so Jan Perez is this French contemporary composer still alive,
I
and
know
he,
Jan quite well. He's
you
a
know
very
him?
fun composer. I do. Yeah, we just spent a couple of weeks together in Italy. He's great.
Oh, good. That's all. I would wonder what he thought of me stealing this from him, but I'm sure a lot of people have stole this a little lick. But yeah, I started out with that. I did the Berio thing, and then there's this composer named Abdel Dager, who has this book of Sufi transcriptions that I really liked for like just solo instrument, and he just any solo instrument, and he just transcribed a bunch of Sufi art, like folk songs and things like that. So I just took this little tiny fragment and uh, and I just used it. So those are basically the three ideas. And then I have a little bit of this piece by CPE Bach that's embedded in it harmonically. So I like to. So my music is all. A lot of it recently has been about borrowing things that I really like and trying to figure out ways to put them all together. And notice how I didn't use microtones or really any esoteric language at all in what I'm explaining here. It's all about like finding a concept. Anyway, let me play some music. Okay. It's a pretty good place to stop actually. And another thing that you can just briefly, another thing that you can hear hopefully in my stuff is that there is the Arabic folk music tradition part of it, but the way that I like to think about it, and that you just heard it in that last segment there, is that you kind of see it in your face at some point, and then it kind of recedes back in the background, and it comes back and forth. And I really like enjoy that as a concept. And this is one of my pieces that actually does that, I think, fairly decently, where you kind of don't know, you kind of hear something that sounds kind of like Arabic music, maybe, but you really can't put your finger on it. But then once you're in the piece and you start to hear stuff like this, you're like, oh, okay, like I can hear where this influence is coming from. And I tend to experiment with different ways of doing this in the music.
What is a taqsim?
So taqsim is a it's a way that Arab musicians introduce a song. So they would have a solo at the beginning of a piece, and it would be very improvisational. The rhythms are kind of all over the place. They stay on a certain scale, and then it would typically introduce a singer or something like that, or the head of the piece. But I did it in the middle of the piece. So instead of doing it at the beginning, I did it in the middle. So I also play a little bit with form as well.
You know, you're sort of saying about the Arabic influence. I think what's really interesting about, especially writing for the flute, is that like the whole 20th century is sort of about Western composers calling ourselves that, roughly speaking, integrating techniques from other different kinds of flute cultures. So it feels very organic. It doesn't feel like, I mean, it's noticeably sort of influenced in that direction, but it doesn't feel out of the fabric in any way. Just because, I mean, as much as you know the percussive sounds or anything else in this piece feel like anything, just explorations of flute color.
One thing I'm really influenced, I mean, if this is kind of getting in the weeds, but my dissertation is about
This is a weeds class. You can get into the weeds.
okay. My dissertation is all about how Arab scholars in Cairo back in the 1930s, they were trying to figure out Arab scholars, music scholars, and Western scholars. They all met together in Cairo for a big, they called it the Congress of Cairo, and they were trying to systematize Arabic music because there's just so many different kinds of scales, so many different kinds of instruments, and so on. They met there to kind of just put all this stuff on paper, figure out like what is F half sharp in E Rast or whatever. Like what are these pitches really? And they tried to figure it out, but they couldn't really come up with a consensus, which was interesting. I think the most interesting thing that came out of it was that the Arab scholars and the musicians there really wanted to have Western instruments, Western harmony, uh, come into the Arab culture. They wanted pianos that were in your standard tuning. They wanted a string orchestra, like with European violins and cello and all that stuff. Whereas the Western scholars were the opposite. They were saying the general consensus is like, no, you should be sticking with your traditional instruments. And it's so opposite of like what's going on today, like in the classical music culture, I feel like. And my whole thing has been basically a discussion between both of those worldviews. You know, I'm not in one camp or the other. I feel I'm sort of in the middle. And I think that's where the interesting music can be made. So that's just my little philosophy lesson there.
I don't know. Does anyone have any questions about the piece, or they can be dumb or smart questions? I'm sure they're all interesting.
Can we go back to the bar 11 and 12? Yeah, here. Uh, my question is for the uh, no key percussion, please. What means no key percussion on bar 10?
No key percussion. I think what happened, this was something that was added later after me and the flute player did a little workshop together where we wanted to keep the same I don't know if you can hear that in the microphone, but the sound
Yeah,
quality without having to do the this thing with the flute.
right. Because I notice he kind of drops the more overt percussive sound in the piece.
Yeah, because it was getting to be too much to do it that fast.
Right, that makes sense.
But I still wanted him to have the same feeling of of the Jan Mraz thing. So I kept the X notation and the staccato.
So is it still playing the actual note here, like on G and the A flat here?
Yeah.
Okay. So what part will the player just like play on a note key?
Don't ask me, ask him.
Okay.
uh, are they? Is it just sort of a play that note and overblow it and have it be percussive? Because that's what it kind of
Yeah.
sounded like to me.
Yeah. 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 I'm going to play that part again quickly. Let's see. Yeah, overblow, staccato, uh, short. Yeah.
One more question is in the 11th bar, so for the E note, this is the overblow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but does it need to be notated here?
Like the E above, like one octave above.
Yeah.
This is a good question. Yes, you hear the E above, but I feel like it overcomplicates the notation.
Yeah, because we looked at like a lot of those, like you know that bad for flute and piano piece that has like kind of the numbers for overblowing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, but is it on YouTube?
Yeah, it has a piece called Presto. It's he kind of uses like two, three, four for like how much overblowing, like, and so that's kind of like yeah, it's almost like instead of sulpan, it's like overblowing. So he uses a, so I think that's why overblowing has been a hot topic in this class.
Ah, okay. But you see, the difference is the music is about the overblowing.
Totally. No,
That's
well,
yeah,
you know,
that's the
and we were
difference.
talking about this last week. Just like a certain amount of overblowing with the flute is inevitably going to have a certain kind of percussive thing will inevitably result. I think the way you have it is great.
Yeah, this piece is my view. I mean, this is gonna maybe go against what your whole class is about, but or maybe not. I don't know. My
I don't
view is
know. I
that
don't know what my class is about.
my view when I teach composers, I mean, this is more of an engraving thing maybe than a notation thing. I mean, notation is really important, but I feel like engraving is not as much important because I feel like
Oh yeah,
composers
that
spend.
is against the whole theory of the
Okay,
class.
okay, yeah. I feel like a lot of composers spend a lot of time on engraving, because as a way of procrastinating from composing.
I mean that can separately be true. Can I ask you a couple of questions about your piece as
Yeah,
well?
yeah.
So when you write, sorry, not to make it about, I have other questions as microtones, but do you have a decision in general for your music about providing fingerings for microtones
Well, I get this
or
question a
to
lot.
not?
I get this question a lot lately.
Especially with wind instruments. Obviously with strings, it doesn't, there's no fingering.
I used to do it. So the example that I like to give is this piece, my clarinet concerto, as just kind of like a. You guys can't see my screen, right? I need to share my screen again.
You see your screen.
Oh, you can?
You're looking at PDF parts,
Okay,
clarinet
good, good,
concerto
good,
number
good, good.
one. Uh,
Okay,
there's an
fun.
operation, listen to afternoon jazz on YouTube.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
like my students have started making fun of my YouTube recommendations, so watch out.
So like that's like what I used to do. Just put
That
fingerings
seems
in.
really a lot.
Yeah. And the players didn't like it. And they would tell me that the fingerings don't work. Yeah. So I actually don't put fingerings in parts anymore. And
Will you put do you put fingerings for multiphonics or do you write multiphonics? I'm trying to think. I see them all.
um my piece, yes, I do have I have a solo. Actually, I don't know. Let's see it. I have a piece for oboe that uses multiphonics pretty extensively.
Because
But I
I said that they should use fingerings for multiphonics. Oh,
well that's
you use numbers. Interesting.
well that's actually not the finished piece. I don't know where the finished score is. Oh, there it is. Not to divert too much, but let's
No.
see what I. Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, I
Yeah,
put
yeah,
a.
yeah. So I sort of suggested to them to use fingerings for multiphonics, and then someone actually yesterday,
There you
last week,
go.
there you go. It was not here asked about fingerings for microtones, and I said, well, we should find out next week. So that was so you in general you just let players find their own uh, fingerings for microtones.
I mean, it's such a, it depends, Ants. I mean, I hate to be that guy. It depends, but like for example, this piece for the piece for flute, like I was working with one player on it, and he had his own ideas of what the microtones should be. So I didn't I didn't write them in. And actually, there was like a few that didn't work as fingerings. I think there was this, yeah, C, G half flat, use embouchure. Like the fingering for this didn't work at all for whatever reason. And I didn't know that. Like I couldn't have predicted that because I don't play flute. So he actually told me to write in the part, use embouchure.
And then I have one more question about how do you define a microtone in general in your music? Like, is it a quarter tone? Is it exactly halfway between the other two notes? How do you define those things?
Well, what I do, so in this piece, it depends on the piece, but in this particular piece, it's defined as exactly half. What I usually say is exactly halfway between, like this note here. It's an F half sharp, so it's exactly between F and F sharp. So if we go on piano tech, so that's F and that's F sharp. So F half sharp would be right. So, but we can't really hear within what 10 cents.
Hmm.
What is it? So, 40 cents, 60 cents, 55 cents. Um, that all is pretty acceptable in my view for the stuff that I'm writing. So but I don't tell them that.
No, no, I'm just curious because you have a lot of spectral influence on your music, so I thought there was a world where, you wanted to sound like a specific overtone or something like that. I mean, this seems much more influenced by the kind of microtones of Arabic music, but
Yeah,
uh,
so yeah, I don't know if we should do a tour day, go piece to piece, but yeah, I have other pieces that use different.
I mean, it's it's honestly kind of whatever you want to share. I think I'm pretty open to always enjoy
Yeah,
hearing your music, so this does not have to be you explain microtonality to us. We just want to hear your music.
cool. Well, does anybody have any questions about this piece? Okay, so I can move on to something else. Actually, it would be cool to have. What do people play in here, by the way? You said some of them are not composers.
Well, we have two new people who just enrolled today,
What
so
are
I'll
what are
provide
what are
them
what are people playing?
one percussionist, one violinist, and one other pianist, one pianist,
Okay,
and then
cool.
four composers.
Okay. Does anybody want to hear orchestral music? Is that useful?
I mean, we certainly have at least four aspiring orchestral composers in here,
Oh,
so
really? Okay. Well, then
I
why don't we
mean,
just
at least in one way or another,
okay.
who all have experimental tendencies. So I think I'd certainly be happy to hear your orchestra piece, but
Okay. Well,
God, your files are so much more organized than mine. It's upsetting me.
are they? I don't I feel like the opposite.
Mine are a mess.
I feel like I don't know where anything is. Okay. Okay. So this is the I'm gonna play a little MIDI from this, but I think the reason I'm showing you this is because I want to show you that it's not about microtones. It's about like the relationships I'm trying to build. And also it's going to show you a little bit of a different harmonic landscape because the other piece I showed you was all melodic.
Mhm.
It's all about harmony. So that's why I'm showing you this. Okay.
So this is an in progress piece, or this is a
This is
complete.
this is this is done now. I'm not going to show you the whole thing,
Mhm.
but this piece is done.
Oh, this is the panoramic view. I'm like, why is this score 100 pages long, 100 measures long?
There is a better engraved version of this, but the thing is, this one has the MIDI playback
Okay,
in it.
great,
So
great.
that's why it looks kind of like a mess.
Yeah.
But let me share with you what I was trying to do here because it'll give you guys some ideas. So the whole idea of this piece was I tried to again I have this whole thing where I like to borrow certain things from the repertoire. So I have this really amazing piece by Ralph Vaughan Williams called Fantasia on a Theme of Thomas Tallis. And if you listen to this little excerpt here, I'll tell you when it starts. It's this bit right here. Now it's about to start. And that's it. So the whole piece is like 15 minutes long, and that was the only part of it that I said, okay, I want to lift that and do something with it.
Who knows that piece out of curiosity? None of you? Wow, we're failing as educators. It's a great piece. I
Nobody, no,
strongly recommend checking it out.
nobody teaches old music anymore. And it's not even that
Not
old.
that old. It's from 1919.
1919, I know. Um, And then if you look at my score, there it is right there, right? And I actually do have a, is it here? Yeah, see, this is what I was saying. That's my, oh, it is here. So I do actually have a reading of this. I'm gonna, with real musicians.
That's great.
This was just recorded like 5 days ago. So let me,
Perfect. This is really like off the. You love to have things fresh off the presses.
yes. God, I just did something stupid. Okay, here we go. Let me exit out all this stuff.
So you had the opportunity to have this work read, and it's going to be performed later, or
So it was read last week in the Bay Area, and then it's going to get premiered in March. So I basically heard them read through bits of it, and then I just finalized it after I heard it.
nice.
So the whole point of this piece is that you have a string quartet, solo string quartet, which are just the principles of each of the various, you know, string sections. And then what happens is my idea was, what if I like or Arabize, let's say for lack of a better term, the Ralph Vaughan Williams lick that you just heard, extend it a bit, and then do kind of like like a comparative analysis sort of piece where you hear my version of it, and then you hear the orchestra do literally a Ralph Vaughan Williams knockoff of like an extended knockoff of that melody. So this solved a couple problems for me. The first one, I wanted to write a string orchestral work that used microtones in a heavily harmonic way, number one, and to do it without making the microtones not match. So one issue I've had a lot in the past, and my former teacher at Columbia, Georg Haas, if anybody knows his music, he complains a lot, is that when he has a big string orchestra trying to play the same microtone, it's never in tune. It always sounds like, if I take the piano tech, it always just sounds, if he's trying to play like a C half sharp, what ends up happening is it sounds kind of like that. Or no, sorry, this is wrong. Like that.
You get a varieties of interpretation of what a quarter tone is, whereas
Kind of sounds like that. But it's almost the same note, but not quite.
because like an orchestra all knows what a C sounds like, but they don't know what a C quarter sharp sounds like, and they're all
Yes.
across.
Yeah, so if they play, if a string orchestra plays an E, right, you will get that basically, right? Like it will sound like it's in tune if it's a good orchestra. But if you tell them to all play C half sharp, no matter how many times they practice it, and I've been in situations where I'm literally saying, let's practice this one pitch from the piece, I will get something that sounds like this, which I got tired of hearing after a while. So this is not acceptable, you know? Because if I try to build a chord that has C, A, and E, I get something that sounds like that instead of something that sounds like this. So I want that,
You want that, but you get a major minor chord
but
instead.
I get this instead, which
And
sucks.
this is a great point, and maybe just if I may take a pedagogical moment, if you write a quarter tone for a string section, especially if you are having a reading in Manus School of Music orchestra, that is what you're going to get 100% of the time. And the only way you would get a consistent quarter tone is if you are working with, 60 members of the best new music ensemble playing in the string section. So this is a really real issue that I think composers come across a lot, and it's and then often, so therefore, for me, a lot of the times if I'm writing quarter tones in an orchestra, I'll give it to a fixed retuned instrument, or I'll give it to a wind player or solo strings, as you did in your case, because then you have a little more control over it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that was my solution to that problem. So let me play you a little bit of that reading. I don't remember where it was exactly, but let me see if I can find this. And what's interesting about what I'm about to show you is that in the reading, what I did was we played some version of, it wasn't exactly this, but it was some version of that. So the solo string quartet played this, and then right after it, you'll hear this. It was the quartet plus the orchestra playing the same thing. So you'll hear this in like real time what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, here we go. It's a little different than what you see. Now it's the whole orchestra. The same thing. You hear that? It's really clashy.
Really wobbly.
Okay. Yeah. So you can see here in real time what I'm talking about. Um,
Was the original idea to have it kind of be didactic and they learn how to play the microtones from hearing the soloists?
yeah.
And that
Yeah.
didn't work, so you took it out of the piece.
Yeah, I didn't like that. I didn't like that there was a possibility that we would get that thing, which you heard a
Hmm.
lot. I didn't
Yeah,
want that.
yeah.
So what I ended up doing was, okay, the piece will be about something else. It will be about the relationship between the Von Williams and what I do.
But
And
that's a
then
really
there,
smart idea because you're utilizing each section for its strength rather than its weakness.
yeah, which I haven't done in the past. Like with my LA Phil piece, I definitely it was like fitting a square peg into a circular hole kind of situation. Um,
Would you be interested in sharing some of that piece, or is that you want to go in another direction?
we can do that. I mean, I think we heard what I wanted to share from this because it's just going to be MIDI.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that then. Does anyone have questions about this, by the way, about this
Oh, yeah,
kind
that's
of like?
great. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Have any of you tried to write microtones before? Yeah, Tyler's quartet had a ton of. It was a sax quartet with a ton of microtones, all worked very well.
I guess I do have a question. It's more of a compositional question than a notation question, but how do you select certain microtones over others? Like, what is your theory?
I've started to kind of gravitate towards a certain set of notes I'm finding, which is this scale. Then occasionally, so this is the octave, and then so it's kind of like so Chris was alluding to this earlier. This kind of mix between just intonation and the Arabic maqam. So like an
Well, it's
Arabic,
kind of like an acoustic scale, isn't it? A little bit, or maybe not quite. I was thinking because of the kind of flattish seven and then the flat third. Is that about? Or it's kind of a blue third and a flat seven, or is that? Am I being
yeah.
too Western about it?
No, no, that's right. Yeah, it has this kind of neutral third, but sometimes I also use the neutral second. So it's not like sometimes I do this. Then I like to mix in, so then I can start doing things like this. You know, you know.
But there's like it's funny just thinking about this idea of microtones. I feel like there's two kinds of people who write microtones: people who like them because they're ugly, and people who like them because they're pretty. Uh, and I kind of put you in the second camp in general.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to make yeah, like, for lack of a better term, pretty. I mean,
Using them melodically, using not using them as a kind of grating sound, but rather as a extension of harmony, extension of for extension of what we got already.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the kind of music I gravitate towards, anyways. I mean, I enjoy all kinds of music, but like, if you put a gun to my head, say, what do you like? I like to write nice harmonies and nice melodies. I just do. But I don't want to write them in a neoclassical, neo-romantic kind of way, if that makes sense. I
Mhm.
wanna actually go back to the original repertoire and see what made it so, and then make my own version of it.
Definitely.
Yeah. Um. So did that answer the? What was your name?
I'm Tyler.
Tyler, did that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. And then, so you think about it mostly modally, and then you build structures from the modes that you like.
Yeah, and I also, when I think about harmony, I don't think about harmony in a kind of functional way. I think about it more as a spectrum of dissonance and consonance. So this, I mean, it's something that I teach my composers, is that, instead of thinking of like, whatever whatever the regular version of that is, um, think of it more like, okay, what is the level of dissonance in this chord that I want versus what is the level of consonants I want. So like, if I wanted a moment that had a lot of consonants, right, I would try to build it with as many. I mean, it sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but when you're actually composing, you'd be surprised how this thought doesn't really enter your mind. Like, this is really open, but the moment I put this pitch in here, it's dissonant. But this level of dissonance is not as dissonant. Is No, this level of dissonance. Okay, you can have this level of dissonance, which is more dissonant. Okay, this is less dissonant, and but this level of dissonance is the same level of dissonance as this. Well, if that wasn't a microtone, but now it has a microtone, so it's a different feeling. And that's the way I like to think of harmony myself. It's actually kind of more of a Renaissance way of thinking of harmony, than a like a, you know,
Sort of
romantic
reminds
way.
me of that Paul Hindemith book, not to compare you to Hindemith, but
That's
he
what he
had that
does. Yeah.
yeah, the whole system of dissonance. If you guys know the book, The Craft of Musical Composition by Paul Hindemith, that's kind of basically his whole theory.
Yeah, but I just apply that with microtones and and spectralism. I just put those shades into it. Um, but yeah, that's kind of like what I do. And I think I mean, for me, it works, but people get caught up with the music theory stuff, and it's important. But I don't think of those things when I'm writing. To be honest, I'm thinking more about, like, what are my voicings? Do I have close voicings? Do I have open voicings? How many seconds, fourths, fifths do I have in this chord? Okay, how many do I have in the next chord? And that's how I'm building my chords. Um, so, I mean, maybe it sounds simplistic to say it that way, but that's what's worked for me. Okay, any other questions about this? Or Chris, did you want to?
I want to hear some. I want to hear some music. I want to hear something else that you're working on or worked on, or there's lots of things I'd like to hear. But is there something you want to share, or
Um, what do I want to share? Let's see. I mean, well, I guess I can share the LA Phil thing because I just can't share the recording. Okay, so let's see. Let me pull this up.
well, this piece I think is really interesting because it also it has a lot of things in it, both notationally and compositionally, that are I think have many challenges for an orchestra in it, and I'd be very curious to just hear what it was like to do this piece, to have this experience of giving a lot of challenges to the orchestra, what you think went well, what you think you wouldn't try again if you were, because I feel like you really went for it in this piece in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so this piece. No, this was. So I mean, it's kind of interesting how I wrote this piece to begin with, like what my process was. So you guys already seen kind of my thought process. I always start with the concept. I always start with score samples, things like that. And this has been something I've been doing maybe the last 3 to 5 years pretty religiously. This piece is interesting in that my score, maybe it's a little narcissistic, but that's what I did. For this piece, my score samples were like the previous five orchestra pieces that I wrote. So what I did was I laid them all out right here on this desk. I wrote it right here, and I put like five of my past orchestra pieces that I liked on the table. I had a highlighter, and I started highlighting my favorite parts. Just like, have you ever done this, Chris? By the way,
No, I mean, I just keep writing the same piece over and over again, so I don't need to. I don't have that issue. It's really redundant to do that.
It's really funny. I don't think I don't think is it did I close the tab already? I had this
Yeah,
student that saw your masterclass from like a month ago in my group, and she literally said she wrote like a Chris string orchestra piece.
that's
Like
awesome.
she heard High Windows, and she literally wrote her own version of High Windows,
I love that.
and it was pretty good.
Oh no, well, that's great. I can retire now. I can just
I was like, oh wow. She wrote it in like 2 weeks. I was like, okay.
wow. It took me a lot longer than that.
Um, anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, so I highlighted like a bunch of things that I like. So one of those things was like this little lick in the bass. So this is like a lick from one of my other pieces. This like percussion tam tam lick is a lick from an octet that I wrote like the year before. Um, what else is like kind of stolen from other pieces? Um, some of this like grace note melodic tuplet material were bits of melodies from other pieces that I wrote, um,
Now, I was
and
going to
so
ask
on.
you because I remember distinctly this piece uses quite a lot of microtones in the full string section. So, is your new piece a reaction to the challenges of that in terms of the orchestra being able to handle that, or is that not related?
No, it's related. I just got a little. I just wanted to hear my microtones played in the way that I imagined them. You know, I didn't want that kind of approximation chord anymore.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to me because I feel so much of orchestra music feels like an approximation of what you're going for, no matter what you do. But maybe that's because my orchestra music isn't
No,
idiomatic.
I agree with that. I mean, even when I was writing stuff without microtones, like I mean, it's like that anyway. You don't know like when you're in a room, first of all, what the orchestra really sounds like. You don't, the hall is going to sound different. The conductor is, always a question mark unless you know the conductor. Um, there's just so many factors that are not in your control when you're writing for orchestra. So with my new piece that I just showed you, I wanted to at least control that factor.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I feel like every piece is also a reaction to the prior one.
Yeah, and this piece is also very difficult rhythmically. And as you saw in the new piece I showed you, it was like all quarter notes and eighth notes and goose eggs. And this piece is not. This is like the opposite.
Can you talk about the string section on the first page with the lines?
Yeah, unfortunately, due to the low resolution of our monitors here, we can't see every detail either, but we can see unusual things happening for sure.
So this is the first page. So by the way, it's triple winds. It's your standard orchestra complement, timpani, three percussion, piano with ebow.
Did that work?
Uh,
Piano with Ebo is always like a little dodgy for me.
I tried it because I saw Haas do it in a piece, but it wasn't for an orchestra this big. But he kind of did a similar. He actually did it for more pitches, I think.
Yeah, that would.
Yeah. Anyway, I tried it. I probably wouldn't do it again, but I mean, as you saw, I tried to throw as much as I could into this piece. um,
No, it works better on lower register, actually, in my experience. I don't know. That's actually kind of the best register. It's just a quiet sound by nature.
yeah, Vicky Ray, I think, was playing it. Who was playing it?
Nice. Vicky.
I think Vicky was playing it. Yeah, and yeah, it's just she was even saying, "Oh, I can't really even hear it from where I'm sitting." I'm like, I know, but it's doubled in everything else. There's A's everywhere, so it's not
No
like a
shortage of ways.
yeah. But what's happening here is this is an Andrew Norman thing in the beginning. Freeze bow and playing position. He does this thing where like people just kind of like do this kind of thing before they start playing, and I just stole that. So you can hear a theme here. um, so that's what that says: freeze bow and playing position. And what you see here is this kind of combination of. So basically, what this is we're trying to figure out a way to show the which player is playing what music. So in this piece, every single person in the string section has a part. This is another Andrew Norman thing. I mean, a lot of Haas does this too. I mean, do I recommend doing this? Not really,
Well,
but I
we've talked
want.
about this because we looked last semester. We looked at string division, and we looked at kind of Ravel in Alvarado del Grazioso goes to six in a single part, but there is a certain point in dividing up the orchestra where you cannot have a divisi 24 in a violin part and have it be useful.
This is kind of a tangent, but like, it ended up not happening. But San Antonio Phil wanted to play this actually last month, and I mean, they ordered the parts and everything, and I told them because they told me the number of strings they had, and I said, well, this is not going to work for your string section because it's too small. Because this is 16 players, this is 14 seconds, 16 first, 14 seconds, and so on. And most orchestras don't have this many string players. So I kind of put myself in a little hole here by saying you have to have 16 firsts and 14 seconds and so on.
Big
So
string.
yeah, so we were working on engraving a version of this that could be played by theoretically any size string orchestra. But then they pulled out at the last like couple months before the show. So
Why'd they
for
pull
what?
out?
Oh, I think there was something with their programming I don't think it had anything to do with my piece. I think there was something. I look at their program; they changed the program around, so my piece didn't quite fit in.
Hmm.
But they said they will play it at some point, maybe next season. So, it's actually funny. Like they paid a rental fee and all that stuff, and they didn't ask for anything back. But they didn't need the music right now anyway. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, after I went through this whole process, I said to myself, and after hearing the recording, was it 100% necessary that I needed to do this kind of divisi? And the answer is no. But did I have to go through this process to hear it for myself? The answer is yes, right?
This is often something I feel like very strongly about something when I'm writing it because the nature of a piece isn't entirely fixed until you finish it. And once you finish it, you can make 50 arrangements of it and it doesn't matter and you stop caring so much about, you know, all the details.
Yeah.
Or you figure it out, it's much harder to be flexible. So will you show us just one of the string parts just out of curiosity of how it would wind up looking in the final version?
Like of the part? Or
Well,
do you
yeah, because
mean
I'm just curious if you don't mind showing any random violin parts. So what is one violinist or one cellist looking at when they see your piece?
yeah, that might be more useful than looking at the score because the score, yeah.
I'm just curious because obviously we haven't gone too far into this, but if you look at a score by Xenakis or any composer who's dividing his strings up very extensively, you find yourself with the problem of parts. And this is a notation class after all, so.
Where are my parts? So you think I'm organized? I
I know
actually
you're
don't.
like,
I actually don't know where the heck are my parts?
maybe
Huh.
it's inside. That's the alias file there.
See, this is the other thing. Where
Okay,
are
I
the?
take it back. You're not organized.
Yeah, not at all. Let's see if I click. I don't think it's in the Sibelius file because we had to make another version of. Let's see if I. I don't think so. Oh, actually, yeah. Okay, here we go. That's why I don't have them because they're here. Okay. So this is violin. Do you see this?
Violin one, desk one.
Right. So what we did was each desk. So like in a string orchestra, you have your concert master here, and then you have your inside player here, and they share a stand. So even though they each have different music, they're going to share the same part. So that's how we ended up doing it. So
Right, and this
this
is actually good to remind players of is that so when an orchestra when string sections are reading violin one and violin one two, the first two violins read off one part. So when, for example, an orchestra asks you for string parts for 16 players, they need eight bound parts for those, and then that's exactly how. Because this is a thing that comes up quite a bit, and I feel like no one ever talks about it. But yeah, go on.
yeah. Sometimes they want nine or 10. They want extras.
Oh yeah, they
Um,
often do.
yeah. So Actually, the part, each individual part is kind of simple if you look at it. Like I don't have like three, four stabs. I don't have divisi a tre or a four. It's divisi a due, when you look at each individual part. So when they split, like that's one and that's two. And then here they're both playing the same thing.
Yeah, and even the divisi are pretty simple.
Yeah, each part individually is kind of simple, but the score is kind of a mess to read in the present state.
What's going on with the two-line system?
Which one?
Beginning and the end.
Oh, I think that's the. I think is that like bowing on the body or something that you have going on there?
First two
Like around
systems?
C2, three, C3.
Oh yeah, yeah. This was one of those techniques that didn't really work that well. I was trying to mimic the idea of breathing in and out, and it's funny. I did this with this is the same thing that Chris was talking about before. When you have a really great new music ensemble, so like International Contemporary Ensemble played this piece of mine that used this exact technique where you play on the bridge like this airless sound, and then you play on the side of the instrument. So the up bow is on the bridge without any pitch, and then the down bow is on the wood of the instrument. And it's funny in an octet with three string players playing, you could hear it, but with an orchestra, you would think with 50 string players doing it, you would hear it, but you didn't really hear it. And also the difference between the up bow and the down bow, even though they were different techniques, wasn't really that audible.
You're probably also a lot further from the instruments than a chamber performance, and also the loudest sound of the orchestra is so much louder than the loudest sound of an octet. So it might just be related. And I've never had any luck with this kind of sound either, honestly.
Yeah, so like if I were like in our rearrangement of this piece, this is another thing I'm going to take a look at because this ended up being more visual than auditory, which was kind of annoying. Like you can see the players doing this kind of thing, but then they wouldn't be producing any audible sound.
Were they grumpy?
Oh yeah, they hated it. Yeah.
Definitely making string players play on the body of their instrument at your own risk in any kind of orchestration context. Um,
Yeah.
so how can you talk about how they did with the played the microtones and how you feel about? I think they did a pretty good job. I've done it, certainly not bad to me.
No, it was fairly decent. It's just that for me, there was so many there were so many things that I wanted to have accomplished in this piece in terms of
Hmm.
like the interpretation that
Hmm.
it was frustrating for me to focus so much on rhythms and pitches.
Yeah,
If I
yeah,
were to like dial it down to like what was my problem with this piece, it was that because there were so many big expressive moments that I wanted to happen, but we just couldn't really talk about them because we were worried about like matching up with pitch and rhythm, pitches and rhythm, pitch. Like, for example, like this spot right here. I mean, like just look at that. Like, there's like, two very complex, distinct rhythms going on at the same time, and that they have to grab onto the percussion, which are playing two different rhythms that clash against each other, and then at the same time, there's these microtonal chords that have to be hit. It was just a lot. I wish that we could have focused more about like what is the orchestra as a whole doing here.
yeah.
You know?
I mean, I thought it came off pretty well, but yeah, I understand all the challenges. This is obviously a very challenging piece, whose maybe effect is. I think the piece is easier to hear than it is to play. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's actually like formally quite a simple piece. It's
yeah,
basically
exactly. Yeah.
ABA. It's got a climax two-thirds of the way through. I mean, it's actually formally quite simple.
And
But
for all its
yeah.
complexity, it actually has a very simple affect, I think, is what I mean to say. It has a very kind of expressive, simple, kind of direct affect about it.
Yeah, no, I actually wanted it to sound more simple, if that makes
Right.
sense. Like I wanted the gestures to be clearer about what I
Yeah.
was doing, not having it sound so muddled at points. And it's hard for me to gauge how much of that is my fault and how much of it is the notation's fault, how much of it is the composition, how much of it is the notation, how much of it is the conductor who I didn't know beforehand. Great conductor, but we didn't really talk too much about the piece and how to
Yeah.
put it together. even between rehearsals, yeah, there were so many. How much of it was that the Hilary Hahn violin concerto came right after this, you know, and that all the attention was to that piece.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot
Larry
of
Hahn wrote a violin
factors.
concerto.
I mean, the Sibelius, yeah.
Sorry.
That'd be fun
Um,
to hear, though.
can you talk about that big string chord that happens at the end of the piece? Sounds really cool.
So I was talking about this a little bit before. So this chord is basically an overtone series chord based on A. So A is on the bottom here, and then we have basically like a pseudo overtone series chord built on top of it, up to like I don't know the 40th partial or something.
But you only use quarter tones there, or what do you? How detailed do you get in your microtonal
It's
deviations?
pretty detailed. Like if it's anything lower than a quarter tone, I don't know if you can see that, but if it's anything less than a quarter tone, I put an arrow on the accidental.
Wait, I don't think we've talked about this yet in this class, but there's kind of two traditional ways to notate micro intervals that we use. There's this kind here, which literally means quarter tone, one slash instead of two. And then there are these ones that have little arrows that sort of say, okay, a sharp but a little bit less, or a natural but a little bit more. And those are the kind of versus here's a 3/4 sharp. It actually has the 3/4 sharp look to it. Okay,
Well,
so you basically have two levels of micro intervals. You have kind of a microtone and a quarter tone, and you round to
yeah,
the nearest eighth. Is that about right?
eighth, sixth tone. It doesn't really matter in this context.
No,
I
because it's
found,
going to be a big chunky chord no matter what you do.
yeah, but I wanted to at least give them the impression of playing that pitch, if that makes sense. Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want them to tune a high B natural. I wanted a B natural, but inflect it a little down. So you have both, but actually in the entire piece, this is the only spot where I have these arrows. Like there's no other spot in the piece that has these like arrow indications. It's just here because I wanted to create a just chord.
Do you think they understood their role in the chord in that way, or did you speak to them about this at all? Or I'm just like I'm always wondering how much to communicate.
The only
Uh,
thing I communicated here was the affect. So the first time they played this chord, they were playing it like very romantically, like a lot of vibrato. And when they played that first note, they were really trying to get it to sing.
mm,
And I was like, no, make it sound more electronic, actually.
mm,
So attack it more, sense of vibrato, you know. And the other note that I made was um, don't, if you're playing a higher pitch, don't try to stick out, because like in the overtone series, just for
it's
everybody, like the higher notes, I mean, they're not going to be, they're quieter naturally. So don't have like I remember the soloist, the concertmaster, Martin was playing on it on this one actually. He was really playing this high A like a solo, and I told him no no no, you got to blend with everybody else, and that fixed it actually a lot.
nice. Did anyone else have any questions? So also just to in the parts there for you, they're not. I mean, this is something I do want to impart. So the part just has one or two people on it per note.
Yeah, so like if you look at the first
Like if we can just look at the violin, if we can look at the violin part for
yeah,
this section.
so you see how that's violin 1 and violin 2 is whatever top pitch is here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we go back to the violin part that we were looking at and go to that last pitch, you see it's actually that's all it says, Divisi A G sharp.
Yeah, makes total sense.
So they actually have so it's funny when they got to that chord, I remember everyone's face being very surprised because on their part they see two notes and then they
And
get
then
to
some.
that part they're like there's like 50 notes.
Oh yeah, and in general, I think string players do like to. I mean, it's an impossible conundrum, but string players like to know what everyone else around them is doing, if at all possible. Like it's only you should only do these kinds of parts if it's divided 20 ways, and there'd be no other way to do it. But in general, even if it's divided by six or something, I prefer to have them all in one part. But 20, it's you're pretty much done for. It would be impossible to do anything else.
Yeah.
Um, does anyone else have any questions about this piece or any? Yeah.
Yeah, what happens on the brass part for the two lines? stuff.
Brass parts, two lines.
For example, the two bounded on the last picture.
Brass parts, two lines. You mean this part, like these
Yeah,
things?
yeah,
Oh, this was breathe in the mouthpiece. Like take the mouthpiece and go, and then this is breathe out. That's all that is.
So they're not blowing to the instrument, it's just the mouthpiece.
I believe I told the mouthpiece. Is there any indication of this? Or maybe it's in the. Sometimes you forget what you did, but I'm pretty sure I tell them to go in the mouthpiece. What does this say? Winds, music below winds. Maybe it is through the instrument.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that can be easily changed, though. Like when you can ask them. I know in your music, Chris, you tell them to put it. You like the mouthpiece technique, right?
I use a reverse mouthpiece to play into
Yeah.
the instrument because it's louder.
I don't think we did that. I don't think so.
Wei Yang, you had a question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask a very similar thing. I like how this piece ends, and I wanted to know the air sound at the end because, like, is that like a combination of all the wind blowing the mouthpiece or something, and then combined with the EVO on piano thing?
I'm not sure if we heard the Ebo that much, but we might have heard a little bit of it. But I think what you were hearing more was the bass. Like the contrabass has this A solo, like the last player, like the eighth player has this A actually that holds all the way to the end, and that's the only pitch that holds. Like the last chair bass player. And then actually what happened was this last pitch here it was played by the second flute player. Uh and that was like that was the last sound that you heard. This combined with the all the strings going. So that probably was the only spot where you really heard that properly, I would say.
Because, you think because of the flute or because so little else is going on or
So little
both?
else was going on and also you
Yeah.
heard it so many times it's kind of in your.
Yeah, they're very quiet sounds, but I agree. They work very clearly in the end.
And I also was influenced by like the end of Try. Have you guys heard
Yeah.
that piece by Andrew Norman? The
Oh, it's a great piece.
the end the end he has this solo piano that just
Talk
kind of.
about other Andrew Norman pieces in this class, but not that one specifically.
Yeah, the end of Try, he has this thing formally, which I really liked. I don't know if I can. I think he has it on the shot site. The very end of Try has this really cool solo piano thing that just
Oh,
meanders forever.
lift the hands up thing, right?
Not just that, but the form. So it's like all this crazy shit for like 10 minutes or so. But then the end of the piece is like this all of a sudden this solo piano. And to me, what's funny about this piece is that's what I remember the most.
Well,
But
the piece starts with the piano idea, and then it keeps on trying to do it, and then it finally gets to it at the end. That's the idea of the piece, right?
yeah, yeah. So where is it? How many pages is this thing? Oh. Anyway, my point is that like when you're looking at scores to study, it's not just about copying what you see exactly, but like what is the affect? So like for me, I like this idea of having this like chord just sit there for a almost too long, especially like if you're in the audience, you hear this chord and it's just going on and on and on and on. You're wondering, okay, I figure the piece is about to end, but I don't know when. I kind of like that feeling, and that's what Andrew does with this piano line. So he has this thing after all these, yeah.
I do remember hearing that ending and being like, "This ending is too long." But so,
Yeah. Oh, I loved it. I thought the opposite. I'm like, this is he's just like toying with us.
no, totally. I think it was
I
like the second time I heard it. It's a great idea for a piece because the first three notes of the piece are this lick, and the piece keeps getting all derailed, and it goes somewhere else and does something else, and finally, at the very end of the piece, you hear like the very first three notes of the piece.
oh yeah, this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we maybe have one more question and then plan? Because I need like a few minutes of them just to wrap things up. But
Yeah, sure.
one more question for anyone. I will ask you the question. What would you say was the? Because you wrote this big orchestra piece and has many challenges for a world class orchestra. Because sometimes I complain, they complain about readings here, and you're writing for one of the best orchestras in the world, and it still had challenges, which as I have faced many times myself. What do you think was the sort of? I mean, I think it's a really lovely piece. So, but I thought, well, what do you think was maybe the biggest learning experience from this whole thing for you as a composer? Because I feel like I always learn something from orchestra pieces.
Oh God, there's so many things. One thing I learned for sure is that, when you're in front of an orchestra, I mean, it's funny. I'm not going to name who this composer is because it's not necessary, but I've heard it from this person that, when you're with an orchestra, it's you, the conductor, and the orchestra, and that's kind of those are your roles, and you kind of just don't want to bother anyone. But I kind of disagree with that. My biggest takeaway from this was that as much as you can, talk to these players or talk to some players before you get to that first rehearsal. Like communicate as much as you can about what you want. You know, because there are actually many things in this piece that worked great. That if I didn't communicate with the players, it would
Hmm.
have been like for example that bass drum thing that you heard, the boom 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 thing. Like if I didn't communicate with the person playing that lick uh, about what the exact sound I wanted, it wouldn't have came off that way. And he knew like I told him the affect I wanted, and he knew exactly what to do, and he had to like change the bass drum sound to get what I wanted, you know.
Well,
And
my
that
experience
yeah,
with orchestral musicians is certain ones really want to talk to you between rehearsals, and some of them really don't want to talk to you. But percussionists usually want to talk to you between rehearsals, because they want to. Because percussionists tend to be very friendly to new music and want to get the thing right, and often their biggest role is in the new pieces. So yeah, I find that everyone except the string players are pretty willing to talk to me between rehearsals. String players are a little bit more of an uneven bunch. Some really want to talk to you, and the concert master does. But I think you should always try, and I think you're absolutely right, and that's a great lesson. Like at least try to communicate with the players, and then if they want to communicate with you, that's free rehearsal time.
yeah, the players, the conductor, even the admin, and actually the librarian too.
Oh
Um,
yes,
the librarian can be your best friend or your worst enemy.
I think I've like said that was this Kazue. Was she working on this, or was she gone at that point?
I don't remember because this was one of my mistakes with this piece. Actually, I should have been communicating with the librarian more than
Librarians are so helpful. Actually, when I had a piece I wrote for the LA Phil was played for the second time or the third time in a performance in Europe, and there was very little rehearsal time. The LA Phil still had scans from the premiere of my piece, like 4 years later, and they got scans of all the bowings that the principals had done, and they gave those to the German orchestra so that they didn't have to do it all over. And then those same scans were just used in a different performance of the piece in the UK. So that librarian saved so many people so much work just by saving this. And then the other thing that I experienced with the LA Phil Library is that I wanted to make a bunch of revisions between rehearsals, and they penciled in all the changes into the parts for me between rehearsals when I gave them a list. So those are librarians definitely your best friend.
Yeah, so a lot of the lessons I learned were structural things like more organizational things. Because when you're writing for orchestra, you almost cease to become a composer, and it's ironic because the orchestra is probably like one of the hardest things to write, but you're also kind of like a head of department, kind of the way a film composer is.
Yeah, it's like a logistical project for sure.
Yeah, so it's not just what you see on the page. It's like how do you interact before the score and the parts are done? How do you interact during the rehearsals? How do you interact like after I go home? What should I be asking them for? You know? Like who do I like what's my post like my exit interview, you know? But like no one's gonna do that for you except you. Like if that makes sense.
Between rehearsals, I often try to think about a set of notes to give to the orchestra that can be read as quickly as humanly possible without any questions. Just to be like, read these off, or sometimes they'll email them to the musicians or put their. I remember between one performance of one of my music pieces, this clarinet player was screwing up so badly, and I had the librarian write a note to the clarinetist being like, don't play this part loud or something. It was like between performances just so it would, because like once the first show happens, you're really not allowed to talk to players.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely after if they're playing three shows, right? Like it's pretty much after the first show it's done. You can't really change the piece.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. So it's a high pressure situation. Um, but yeah, I mean, there musically speaking, I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, I guess you kind of, I mean, my best response to what you said, Chris, is like, did you like showing you my string orchestra piece,
Mhm.
you know, and to see what
If
I
you
did.
don't learn anything from a piece that affects the next one, then you're not a very good composer. Every composer should be learning from their experiences, positive and negative. That will just, or even just like practical. Some of it's not like, if it, I learned that given this amount of rehearsals, this is possible. So it's not like your piece wasn't good, but you're like, okay, I'll say, certain things I'll save it for when I have the ensemble intercontemporaire orchestra playing my piece. And when I'm working with this level orchestra, maybe I'll make it a little simpler and give them whole notes.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. And another part of it is like the level of, my North Star is just like maintaining my. I mean, it sounds cliche, but the more pieces I write and the more deep I go into this career, it's you have to be mindful to keep your curiosity alive
Yeah.
for new things, and also even if you've had a certain level of success, it doesn't make you infallible. That makes sense.
I think there is no experience on earth quite like hearing your orchestra piece played for the first time by an orchestra. There's just nothing like it. It's the most thrilling and terrifying experience you can possibly have.
Yeah, but it's also, I've seen this happen with other composers too, where like they get to a stage where they're starting to get performances by major orchestras, and they kind of think that they can't do any wrong, you know? And
Well,
they kind of, and that I think is a very tough place to be as a
well,
composer.
fire
Um,
me when I do that.
yeah. And I'm trying my best not to be in that situation. So like you saw this piece, but then you saw the Fantasia thing, the string orchestra piece. It's like, okay, clearly he's doing something different. He's got the same kind of aesthetic, but he's purposefully trying to do something different that is built off the thing before. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I'll leave you with that, I guess.
That's a great. Thank you so much, Saad, for taking this time. Thank you for sharing your music. So cool.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
I'll send them because you have this score posted on your website, don't you?
This one?
Yeah, don't you? Or you have
Yeah,
the
yeah, I have everything up there. Yeah, everything
great.
is
So
up
I'll send
there.
them your website and they can go check out this stuff in more detail later on.
Perfect. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
again. Talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Bye.